All right, good morning, folks. Glad you could all make it. We got some people that are hanging out. I'll continue to admit people as we go along. But welcome. This webinar, again, half-hour webinar, is going to be on more around your hiring and hiring practices. Oh, that's a good-looking face there. Look at that. I see a little kiddo hanging out with mom during workday. Good deal. All right, don't leave hiring to chance. So we're going to jump into this. Like I say, we'll take these short and sweet, 30 minutes, and then we'll spend 15 minutes on question and answers. If you have them, this will be recorded. If you want to go back and look at it again, it should be out later this afternoon or sometime tomorrow morning. We're really just focusing on hiring practices, best practices. We will be using the PI just to start the day off great. Just remember, we're all awesome. And as we look into hiring, there's no good or bad people. There's just good or bad fits. So that's really what we want to focus on today. Just a little overview of the landscape. I know some of you already know this, but it's getting a little bit more difficult to hire folks, to get them to apply. And some people are having trouble with that segment of the population we call millennials. The advice that I have would be get over it, because over 50% of the workforce will be millennials here in just another year or two. So we have to get used to how they do things and things like that. But a lot of it's just really the same kind of stuff. But if you look at just back 10, 11 years ago, you see the workforce, it was much easier to have a bigger funnel when you were looking for people. It's a 40-to-1 ratio. Nowadays, that ratio is down to 1-to-1. And the other big significant issue and challenge that folks are having is that 1 in 3 new hires quit their new job within the 6 months of hire. We'll touch a little bit on that today. I don't want to focus too much on it. I think we'll probably just do another webinar on onboarding and maintaining folks. Just touch a little bit on it. Wow, a lot of people today. Okay. Ding. All right, quick top 5 reasons for employee turnover. Feeling undervalued, underappreciated. Number 4, below market compensation packages. Number 3, stunning growth, lack of coaching, guidance, and leadership. Today, what we're really focusing on is a mismatch. Do you have the right person? Do you have them in the right role? And then the other thing that you really want to take into account, the last one, that we can help you with too, is a terrible boss. Usually people don't quit their job, they quit their boss. So helping them manage people correctly, all can be used with and done with analytics. Let's keep in mind today what we're talking about. So when we're talking about the right person, right role, I'm going to give you a model for that, real quick model, really simple model that you can look. But when we're looking at PI, the behavior of PI, there's 2 things that we do with the assessments that most of you on the phone or on the webinar probably utilize, is the PI and the cognitive assessment. What we're looking at with the PI is the motivating needs, behaviors, and drives. In this graph, it's the red stuff. The blue stuff is what we typically look for when we're hiring people: skills, experience, interest, and all that. What we want to focus on is what's innate to that person. We're not looking, when we use analytics, we're not looking for can, we're looking for will. Will they do it, and will they do it for long periods of time? There are people that can do things. You and I have all done things in the past work-wise that we really didn't like. We can do those things. You want to keep that in mind. You can do those things. But when we're looking to bring on employees and get them in the right role, really what you want to look at is, will they do it, and will they do it well for long periods of time? Keeping, retention, engagement, all that. Blue stuff typically is irrelevant when we're looking at fit to role. It's important, okay, but you have to have the right behavior there. That person has to be driven. So what we say a lot is hire for drive, teach for skill. And then we'll talk a little bit about the cognitive piece, but most of today what we're talking about is how to get folks and look at that behavioral match. PI real quick. Most of you, I think, on the phone, there's a couple people I'm not sure who are, but for most of you on this webinar, the ABCs and Ds of things, I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on it other than just real quick. When we look at somebody's PI, so again, the behavioral attributes of the person. When we look to hire, it's the behavioral attributes of the role and how that matches up. So when you think about your position, what kind of dominance does it mean? What kind of communicator does it need? Does that person need to juggle multiple tasks at the same time and be all over the place? Or do they need to keep their head down and be more process oriented? And lastly, what do they need? Do they need to be more of a risk taker, where it would be more of an outside salesperson, or do you need quality assurance, where you have to have that level of detail, that level of structure? It depends on the position. And again, remember, can versus will. A lot of people can do things, but it's will they do it, and will they do it well for long periods of time? All right, the method that we follow, real simple. Some of you I know do use this. Be interesting to hear feedback from some of you at the end if you want to provide it, just your best practices. But this just keeps it simple. First, the process dash is what we're looking at is define. Okay, figure out what you need. That's that process, and I'll walk you through each one of these this morning. Define, figure out what you need, attract, get someone to apply. How do we get them to apply? Remember, the funnel's a lot shallower now. So how do we get those right people to apply? How can we be that employer of choice? Are there things that we can do to give us a competitive edge? And I know some of you are experiencing that. Some of you are trying to experience that as well. Select, who do we figure out who's going to come on, all right? And then hire and onboard them. Like I said, we won't spend a whole lot of time on the onboarding, just because that could be another webinar of its own. But if you have questions, I'll field those as well. But first, the define. What's important in the role? So think about when you look at behavioral attributes of the role. So you want that behavioral attributes of the role. What does that person need to do? So if before I mentioned you need a quality assurance manager, what does that look like? That probably needs some detail. Outside salesperson probably need more, be able to hunt the risk of the commission position. If it's somebody that's in customer service or customer facing all the time, you need to ask yourself, hey, do I need this person to be more communicative, more people oriented? Do I need them to be social? Do I need them to be nice? Do I need them to be both? So it depends on what you're looking for, but define that up front. Most people, when they go to do this, especially inside a company, I was just doing a job assessment reconciliation the other day with a company, and 4 of their top people were doing the job assessment, and all 4 were all over the board on what they thought the role should be. But make sure you understand what is the most important thing that this person or this role is supposed to be doing. All right, figure out on the most important things. Just a couple things off the top of of my head that you should be focusing on that I ask a lot when we do reconciliations. The big one is this role strategic or is it tactical? Does this person need to do large amounts of follow-up and follow through, or do they need to be bigger picture? Do they need to be able to delegate, or do they have anybody to delegate to? Right? When you do your roles, do them internally. Is this a proactive role? Does this person need to handle multiple things? Do they need to be more of a creator of change? Or the opposite of that is this an implementer? Is this somebody that needs to implement things, process, procedure, so that our company can grow, or a department can grow, or sometimes even if it's a person, to help them grow as well. So what do we really want them to do? Get clarity on that. And you can measure them, also measure them with your top and bottom performers if you have people that are already in that role. When we're looking at the ideal candidate, what we want to set up first, drives and cognitive, that's the PI, and that is the cognitive assessment. Okay, the cognitive assessment is just used in the hiring. We help set, for those of you that don't use it yet, we help set those targets, very similar to how we set the target with the job assessment. Those are going to stay the same. That's why we say hire for drive, teach for skill. When we looked at that graph earlier with the millennials, you know, you're going to get smaller resumes. But that shouldn't deter you from getting the right person. You can teach skill. You can't teach drive. That's pretty much hardwired. All right. So then there's the workplace behavior that you get. Variable is the skills, the knowledge, and experience. Right. A lot of people have the experience, some don't. Do you have a good onboarding process? How can you teach that skill? Can I take somebody that's younger in age and teach them the same things that my more mature and veteran people already know, as long as they're wired the same? When you're looking at the resume and the interview, typically it's with knowledge, skill, and experience, the values and interests, the predictive index you already have. So how do we use that in this whole process? The next piece, that's step 2, that's attract. What are the goals of this step? How do I find the right people? And I know some of you are using this pretty well. This is the verbiage right out of your PI system. For those of you that have the PI right now, if you don't have that, think about the behavioral attributes of that role. What do you want? And we can help you design this, but these behavioral attributes should be up closer to the top of that job posting than all the way in the bottom. Some don't have it at all. What I would suggest is first piece needs to really be what the cool stuff about your company is. And then the second piece really needs to define the behavioral characteristics. I saw something years ago that was some research that said most people only spend about 37 seconds looking at a job ad. You have to catch their attention. If it's somebody, for those of you on the line that know PI, if it's somebody that's real strategic, it's a really high A and a low D, just use bullet points. They're not going to read this summary stuff. Bullet points actually attract their eye. If it's somebody that's more detailed, use more of the summary. Structure your job posting to that PI that you have. You know what you want. characterize it in there, in that job posting, and use that. Then whatever they need below that skill requirements, list that after. That's the last third. But really catch their eye with what's behavioral, right? And know your person. What I mean by know your person, again, is just put that verbiage in there that's going to attract the person that you want. So the whole person. You should have matches. So you have the match of the job assessment to the job pattern. We'll look at that because we have the interview guide in the next slide or two. The cognitive assessment, that's your second data point. For those of you that don't have it that would like to add it, we can talk about adding that too. Eventually PI corporate will just put that all together, I think in the next year or two. So everybody will eventually have it. But that gives you the two strongest data points for success in a role. And what I mean by that, the data points, behavior and cognition are known for those are the two strongest data points for success in any role. Blue stuff, if you remember from that pie chart that we saw earlier, value, skill, define that. Some companies have that pretty well defined. Others, we need to work on it. What do you actually have to do? Right? And how can it influence the process? Prioritize your candidates. Right? Don't waste time with people who are a strong mismatch. One of my clients the other day sent me, they're hiring a high-level person, and I didn't know he was joking at the time, but he sent me somebody that was completely opposite on every 4 drives. And he said, hey, look, we're thinking about this person. What do you think? And I wrote back and I was like, oh man, that's really off. And then he emailed me back. He's like, I was just joking. I just wanted to see if you were paying attention. So don't waste time putting people through that aren't a good fit. Hire for drive, teach for skill. And this is what your system should look like. So when you get an interview guide, so I mentioned earlier, behavioral, cognition, those are the things that you want to match. The other point that's going to give you more success in your hiring process is a structured interview. Now, what the interview guide will do inside the PI system, it overlays that person's PI with the pro for the role. So in the orange here on the screen, that's the pro for the role. For this is outside sales. I mean, this is just a generic one. Bernie Banana is not a real person, by the way. So what Bernie would struggle with, and if I'm going to bring him in for the interview, so he's close on most of the drives, but he's really far off on that D drive. I want to structure my interview in a way that I'm asking a lot of questions around that D drive. So it might sound something like, hey, Bernie, tell me about a time where you really had to pay attention to all the details in your previous role. What happened? What did you do about it? And what was the outcome? I'm not going to ask a lot of questions with that low C because I know he already has it. I want to figure out, if I'm going to bring this candidate on, does this person have the proven ability to push a rope uphill all day long on something that doesn't come natural to him? Hire. Okay, when you hire them, this is a little bit of the onboarding. One of the things that we see a lot of our clients struggling with is they can get the right people, but they're really having a hard time keeping the right people. Some of that is, I would say a lot of it is just managers, supervisors, and how to motivate and keep people. These are just some suggestions, and I said we could probably do it just a whole onboarding webinar on this, so I won't spend too much time on it because we are running out of time. One of the things that you should do when you onboard them is give them the coaching guide. let them see the job assessment. So the job assessment is just an overlay of their PI, again, with that pro job assessment for the role. And then on the far left-hand side is the coaching guide. So now you're giving them objective data points, not subjective, here's how I feel about you. It's objective. Here's where you're going to probably struggle here and there. How can I help? You know, we put you in this role. This is probably what you're going to struggle with, and this is why. So it's all objective. The other thing that I would do, it's on the far right there. Some of you I know are using this already, is the relationship guide that's printed out in the PI software. Really cool. I have a lot of people using this. I've had a lot of people just email and call and say, man, this saved their working relationship, or we're working better than we ever have because we understand one another a lot better. What that relationship guide does is you can put any two people in there. So Bernie and Liz, again, Liz Lemon is a fictitious character if you didn't get that by now. So what do Bernie and Liz, what are their strengths? What could be their possible strengths? What are their cautions? What do I need to be cautious about? And relationship tips. This should come best practice in a folder day one. And if you want more information on that, like I said, maybe we'll do a webinar on it. But if you have questions right away on it, call in. We'll get an appointment scheduled. We'll have somebody walk you through that. But think about your onboarding process and how many documents you can have that provide clarity day one for that person. There's that person's PI. There's the job assessment that should be in there. There's the coaching guide that should be in there. There's the relationship guide that should be in there. And if they have direct reports, the PIs of their direct reports. If they report to somebody else, the PI of their person. That's setting them up for success on day one. Okay, again, how do you manage them? Were they dead when you hired them, or did you kill them? We can get you the right people with PI, but how do you manage them? So just some quick tips. For some of you, this would be in the new toolkit on page 6 in the new toolkits. Summary of motivating needs. Really, when you get people on, and you can structure even your offer letters around there. So when you're bringing somebody on, what do they need? Okay, if that person's a high B, they need FaceTime. They need feedback. Going down to feedback, if they're a low D, just general performance feedback. If they're a high D, specific performance feedback. Where do I put them once I get them on here? This whole open space concept that the companies have gone into, I don't think that works for anybody. It looks like it works for the low Cs because they're binging around every place because they need all that disruption and interruption. It really doesn't work typically for the high Cs because they just don't want to be bothered, and that's not how they work best. They work best when they're left alone without those interruptions. So those open floor concepts, you have to watch out for those. Not that they're entirely bad, but just because all the low Cs look busy doesn't mean they actually are. All right. So don't accommodate differences, love them. I hope this was not too much information, but just the right amount of information that you needed for today. Remember, define that role. Get clear on that role. If you're not clear, rule number 1, most of you know I don't have a lot of rules, but rule number 1 for me is when you go to do that job reconciliation, have at least one of our staff help you walk you through that. Right? That's just best practice. Attract. Make that job posting sing to that person so that the person that you want is the person that's applying. Select them. Right? Get more structured in your interview process. Make sure it's a match between the behavioral piece and the cognitive piece. And then structure that interview. Don't go willy-nilly on the interview and prepare 5 minutes before they come in. Take time to prepare with the questions. Always more questions around wherever that gap is between that person's PI and that job assessment for the role, and then hiring and bringing them on and onboarding them. And I promise you we'll do another webinar around that too. But think about your best practices as you onboard people. I find that a lot of people are really not so much, when I look at it, not so much struggling with getting people, although some people are. They're struggling with how do I keep them. We're getting them and they're going right out the door. It's a revolving door. So how do I keep them? It's by managing them correctly, giving them what they need. And it doesn't matter what generation you grew up in. Everybody needs to be treated in a certain way. So look for that motivating needs. If you have the toolkit, that's page 7 in the new toolkits. And just some things coming up that we have before we go to questions. I'll leave this up as we take questions. It's just some trainings in the next month that we have. The Managing People to Perform, April 2nd and 3rd. That's actually next week. I think that's pretty full, but I think there might be 2 or 3 slots left for that. We have an Influencing for Results. That's more using the PI to influence people. April 10th. For those of you that are out in Ohio that maybe want us to stop in for a tune-up, we'll be out there doing a training. For any clients down south, if you need a tune-up, we'll be down in, I'll be down in Louisiana, April 18th. And then I did want to mention for those of you on the phone, especially if you're really involved in PI and have been a long-term client, we have some additional assessments that we are going to be training in. If you would like to participate with us alongside with myself and the team, we'd love to have you. Those are other assessments that we use that some of you have used in addition to the PI. That's the values index, that's the attribute index, and the organizational health check. We'd love to have a few of you. We can't, obviously we can't have everybody in there, but if you're interested, we'd love to have you. I just need to know it actually probably by the end of tomorrow, latest on Monday, because we need a head count. We're bringing in a trainer from the Midwest to do that, to give us a little bit more training around those assessments. Those assessments would be used more for motivation inside your work environment. They could be used for coaching. We have a lot of our teams, especially our leadership teams, that use the attribute for coaching. And then we have quite a few of our companies that use the organizational health check in their teams and in their organizations to drive revenue. And then we'll be out in Chicago as well. I know some of you on the phone are from Chicago, so we'll be out there as well. So let us know if you're interested in training. Next breakfast briefing, we'll have a client spotlight. They're going to walk us through. This is a client that's a long-term client. They're going to walk us through some best practices of what they do. Not everybody's perfect, but we're going to share some best practices. I'm going to do a Q&A with them. Hopefully this time when we tape it, it'll be good. We did tape it last time, but the mic was all jacked up, so I apologize for that. So we can't release it because you can't really hear it. And then the next webinar will be April 18th on creating your talent strategy. So I will open it up for questions. Let me bring the chat in here. If you have the chat, I'm looking at the chat right now. Does anybody have any questions on what we went over today? Nothing? You guys are way too easy today. Hopefully this was helpful. Please let me know if it was. We appreciate the feedback or any other topics that you want to do during these webinars. Hopefully it's the right amount of time. And like I said, the recording will be up so you can share it later with other people or just go over and review it. But for now, we're going to sign off. And if you have any questions on the PI, and just give us a contact. And last but not least, for all you Jedis out there, all you PI Jedis, may the force be with you. Have a great rest of the week.